Imagine standing at the entrance of a wooden training hall where the scent of polished wood and the faint echo of practiced steps linger in the air. A young life begins within these quiet walls, guided by discipline and tradition. Before I move forward, we are counting on you to support our channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing documentaries to folks like you around the world. Thank you. In feudal Japan, the raising of a warrior was not left to chance. From the moment a child opened his eyes to the world, his path was shaped by family duty, clan loyalty, and a strict code of conduct. By the age of 5, a boy born into a warrior household might be handed a small wooden sword, not as a toy, but as an introduction to a life of discipline. He would watch his father practice, absorbing posture and focus. Within the house, elders told stories of ancestors who served their lords with steadfast hearts. These tales were not bedtime fantasies. They were lessons designed to instill bravery and determination. Family life followed structured routines. Mothers taught their sons to bow correctly, to speak respectfully, and to control their emotions. Fathers demonstrated the importance of honor in every gesture. Meals were occasions for practice in etiquette, silence was prized, and each movement conveyed respect. When storms rolled over the mountains, parents avoided frightening their children with tales of monsters. Instead, they taught them to sit still and listen to the rain, to face the unknown with calm eyes. Elders believed that fear planted early would grow into weakness. So, children were guided gently through the dark so that confidence became a habit. As boys grew, their training expanded. They were taught to read and write classical characters, studying moral texts that had been copied and treasured for generations. The words of Confucian scholars explain duties to family, lord, and community. Through these texts, young warriors learned that their lives were part of a broader order. They were not isolated individuals, but links in a chain, responsible for upholding the reputation of their ancestors and making certain the stability of their household. From an early stage, children in warrior households were taught the significance of their roles. Boys and girls shared common values, yet their paths diverged as they reached 7 years of age. At that point, boys moved deeper into the sphere of martial preparation, and girls began to learn the delicate art of managing a household. This separation was not rooted in disdain, but in a carefully designed system meant to prepare each child for the tasks that awaited them. Sons were trained to serve, defend, and lead, whereas daughters learned to organize resources, maintain order, and support their family. By the age of 7, a young boy might take part in simple exercises that built strength and balance. Running along narrow garden paths, climbing trees, and practicing footwork on stones were not simple pastimes. They were ways to refine coordination. He learned to wield a short staff with control, guided by an older relative or hired instructor. He learned to fall without injury by practicing on mats made of woven straw. His days alternated between physical drills and recitations of moral maxims. Each lesson reinforced patience and humility. Girls in these families were not idle. They learned to sew, weave, and prepare food, but they too learned to defend themselves if danger entered their home. Women of the warrior class were expected to manage servants, supervise estate finances, and protect the household when men were away. Some were trained with the naginata, a polearm that allowed them to keep an enemy at a distance. In later centuries, this training formed a tradition of onabugisha, women warriors who stood alongside their male relatives. Their diligence was as admired as that of their brothers, and they shared the same sense of duty, though expressed within different spheres. At the heart of both paths was a focus on character. Parents modeled kindness toward elders, fairness toward workers, and loyalty toward their lord. Children saw these qualities demonstrated daily. They learned to greet visitors with measured courtesy and to accept corrections without argument. They learned to wait patiently for their elders to speak before voicing their own thoughts. Through these small acts, respect became a natural part of their behavior. Observation was a necessary part of learning. Boys watched their fathers prepare for a journey, adjusting armor ties and making certain that blades were cleaned and wrapped. They observed the care taken with each item, noting that no detail was overlooked. A father might allow his son to assist in arranging helmets and lacing. This did more than teach a practical skill. It created a shared moment when the young apprentice could ask questions and listen to stories of past battles. These narratives were told not to glorify conflict, but to illustrate the responsibilities that came with carrying a blade. In quiet mornings, before the sun lifted fully above the mountains, boys joined their elders for walks in the forest. Their steps were silent on the soft earth, learning to move without breaking twigs. They learned to breathe steadily, to sense the direction of wind, and to notice the shape of trees and rocks. Such skills would later help them navigate terrain in armor. In these walks, the natural world was a teacher. The patience of a crane standing at the water's edge became a lesson in stillness. The persistence of a stream cutting through stone became a lesson in perseverance. Physical training gradually grew more complex. Boys practiced drawing a wooden sword swiftly and placing it back into a scabbard. They learned to strike at targets made of bundled straw with controlled power. Instructors corrected grip, stance, and foot positioning. There were no shortcuts. Improvement came with repetition. Every session concluded with bows to teachers and partners, reinforcing humility. Reading and writing were as important as martial skills. Many sons of warrior households spent time in temples or study halls where monks taught them characters and philosophy. In these quiet spaces, the crackle of ink on paper echoed through the day. Students sat on tatami mats with low tables before them, holding brushes made of bamboo and animal hair. They learned the proper way to grind ink on a stone and the correct posture for writing. Each stroke required precision, and teachers encouraged them to control their breathing as they wrote. Calligraphy was a form of meditation. Through the formation of characters, young minds learned patience and focus. The texts they studied included moral teachings, poems, and historical chronicles. Chinese classics explain the relationships among father, son, ruler, and subject. Stories of legendary heroes and wise ministers illustrated loyalty and self-control. Young pupils recited passages aloud, committing them to memory. They were examined not only on their ability to repeat the words, but on their understanding of the principles within them. In addition to foreign texts, young warriors read works from their own land. Tales of the Heike recounted the rise and fall of clans during earlier conflicts, teaching that fortune can change quickly. The tale of Genji, though not a martial story, offered insight into courtly life, subtlety, and the consequences of actions. Poetry collections encouraged sensitivity to nature and emotion. Teachers saw value in cultivating sensitivity along with strength, believing that a warrior should have a refined mind to match his physical prowess. Moral philosophy formed the backbone of a warrior's education. Through reading and listening, young men came to understand the unwritten code that would later be called Bushido. This code was not a single document, but a collection of ideas that described how a warrior should conduct himself. Loyalty to one's lord was paramount. Service was seen as a sacred duty, and a warrior was expected to put his lord's needs ahead of his own comfort. Honor was not an abstract concept. It was lived through actions, from the way one greeted elders to the way one accepted punishment. Courage meant more than braving a battlefield. It meant facing hardship without complaint and speaking truthfully when silence would be easier. Integrity required consistency between word and deed. Politeness was not a superficial show, but a measure of respect toward others. Benevolence encouraged warriors to protect those weaker than themselves. Self-control was the thread that tied these virtues together. Without control, a strong arm could cause harm rather than protect. Teachers explained that moral conduct was necessary for social harmony. They pointed to examples of clans that flourished when their leaders acted with justice, and of those that fell when greed and cruelty prevailed. Through such examples, students came to see that personal virtue contributed to the stability of the realm. A pivotal moment in the life of a young warrior was the coming-of-age ceremony, known by various names over the centuries. This rite signified the transition from childhood into the responsibilities of adulthood. Typically held between the ages of 12 and 15, the ceremony was conducted at a shrine under the guidance of elders. The night before, the young participant might spend hours reflecting on his life so far, contemplating the duties ahead. He would not be alone. Family members offered quiet support, making certain that he understood the gravity of what was to come. On the day of the ceremony, he would approach the shrine wearing special garments. His hair, which had been worn in a child's style, would be cut and arranged in the manner of an adult warrior. A senior member of his clan or his lord acted as sponsor, presenting him with a new name and sometimes a set of swords. With this act, the young man was welcomed into the circle of adult warriors. A formal meal followed, during which he would sit among elders, no longer at the children's table. Conversations at this event conveyed expectations, but they too conveyed trust. The community signaled that they believed he was ready to carry the weight of service. From that day forward, he was expected to act with the dignity and responsibility of his station. The transition was not always easy. Mistakes were inevitable, but elders provided guidance. The ceremony reminded him that he was not alone. He was part of a lineage that would support him as he learned to fulfill his duties. With the coming-of-age rite behind him, training intensified. Swordsmanship, known for its precision and controlled power, was practiced daily. Instructors often began by teaching how to grip a sword correctly, how to stand with balance, and how to draw a blade smoothly. Students repeated basic cuts until the movements flowed without thought. They trained with wooden swords to avoid serious injury, gradually moving to blunted steel as their skills improved. Sparring sessions demanded that students anticipate and respond to their partner's movements. In this way, they learned to read intention through subtle shifts in posture. Archery formed another key component. Longbows made from layers of bamboo and wood were tall, requiring strength to draw. Trainees learned to balance the bow at the hip, extend the left arm, and pull the string back slowly. Breathing was timed with the draw. A steady exhale aided in releasing the arrow. Lessons took place outdoors, often in all seasons. Students stood in rows facing targets made of straw. The sound of arrows leaving the string, followed by the soft thud of impact, created a rhythm. Instructors walked behind, adjusting elbows and shoulders. Over time, archery taught patience, focus, and an understanding of distance and wind. The spear and polearm disciplines built strength and coordination. Learning to wield a spear involved mastering footwork, thrusting techniques, and sweeping motions. The long shaft allowed for strikes at varied ranges, and students practiced against targets and in paired drills. For foot soldiers and for those defending narrow passes, polearms provided an advantage against mounted opponents. Training, too, included unarmed combat methods, which taught leverage, joint locks, and throws. These skills made certain that a warrior could defend himself even without a weapon. Horsemanship was necessary in periods when mounted archery dominated warfare. Trainees spent time in stables, grooming horses, and learning to mount smoothly. Riding lessons covered how to guide a horse with knees and reins, how to stand in stirrups as drawing a bow, and how to maintain balance at speed. Like other skills, progress depended on patience and repetition. Training often began before dawn. Young warriors rose from futons, folded bedding neatly, and washed their faces with cold water. After a simple morning meal, they reported to their training grounds. In winter, breath hung in the air, and fingers stiffened from cold. In summer, insects hummed, and sweat soaked through clothing. Weather was not an excuse. Instructors believed that facing the elements built resilience. Practicing sword cuts under falling snow or during rain taught adaptability. Discipline was strict. Students arrived on time or bowed deeply in apology. They cleaned the training hall before each session, sweeping dust and wiping sweat stains from the floor. Respect for the space and for tools was considered an extension of respect for teachers. If a student failed to show the proper attitude, he might be asked to leave the hall for a period of reflection. Correction was firm but not cruel. Instructors used words to guide improvement and sometimes light taps with a wooden stick to adjust posture. Sometimes unexpected drills tested readiness. An instructor might strike without warning, prompting students to react quickly. These exercises taught constant awareness and prevented complacency. They reinforced the idea that a warrior must be prepared at all times. At the end of each day, students reflected on what they had learned. Some wrote notes about mistakes and progress. Others meditated, sitting in silence to calm the mind. Through these practices, physical training became intertwined with mental refinement. The spaces where training took place were carefully arranged. Dojos were simple structures built of wood and paper. Tatami mats covered the floor, providing a firm yet forgiving surface. Along one wall, racks held wooden swords, spears, and bows. These weapons were organized neatly, with each item in its proper place. A raised platform at the front was reserved for instructors. Scrolls hung on the walls bearing calligraphy that expressed virtues like loyalty and rectitude. Natural light filtered through paper screens, casting a soft glow that changed with the sun's position. Before entering, students removed their footwear and bowed. This gesture acknowledged that the dojo was a place of learning and mutual respect. Inside, voices were kept low. The sound of footsteps on mats, the clack of wooden swords, and the occasional call of an instructor formed a steady rhythm. Simple benches near the entrance allowed students to observe senior practitioners before their own turn. Clothing was utilitarian. Trainees wore loose trousers and jackets secured with belts. For sword practice, they added protective gloves and sometimes padded vests. For archery, a sleeve was worn on the left arm to protect against the string. Each garment had a purpose, and students learned to fold and store their uniforms properly. The care given to clothing and equipment reflected the care given to training. Outside the training hall, storage buildings housed armor. Lacquered plates hung on racks, helmets rested on stands, and saddles were cleaned and oiled regularly. Maintaining this equipment was a duty shared by students and servants. Through such tasks, youths gained a practical understanding of their gear, making certain that they would be prepared in times of need. Mental cultivation balanced the physical demands of training. Meditation sessions took place in quiet rooms or under trees. Students sat with legs crossed, eyes lowered, and hands resting gently on their laps. Instructors guided them to focus on breathing, counting inhales and exhales. Thoughts were allowed to drift by without attachment. Over time, this practice sharpened concentration and encouraged calmness. The tea ceremony provided another avenue for refining the mind. Students learned to prepare and serve powdered green tea with precise movements. The ceremony was conducted in a small room with a low entrance, reminding participants to bow as they entered. Each action, from folding the cloth to wiping the bowl, was deliberate. The host and guests communicated through subtle gestures. Through repeated practice, students developed awareness of timing and attention to detail. Calligraphy continued to serve as both art and discipline. Practicing strokes required a steady hand and controlled breathing. Mistakes could not be erased, teaching acceptance and perseverance. Students sometimes copied passages of poetry or wisdom onto long scrolls, which were later hung for reflection. Participation in poetry circles encouraged young warriors to express themselves beyond the physical, composing short verses about seasons, emotions, or scenes from daily life sharpened sensitivity. Though their future might involve conflict, they were urged to appreciate the beauty of a falling blossom or the cry of a bird at dawn. This dual cultivation of strength and sensitivity formed a hallmark of the class. Beyond training grounds and study halls, the sons of warriors often served as pages in the households of their lords. This service provided a practical education in governance and courtly behavior. A young page might accompany his lord on journeys, carrying messages or assisting with ceremonial duties. He observed how his lord addressed higher-ranking officials and commoners alike. He learned to read subtle cues during meetings, to sense when to speak and when to remain silent. Through this service, he built relationships that could shape his future. Daily tasks included delivering letters sealed with wax, preparing seats for guests, and arranging armor before a procession. Pages were expected to anticipate needs, fetching scrolls or utensils without being told. They learned the layout of their lord's residence intimately, knowing which rooms were public and which were private. Their conduct during these duties reflected on their families. In this way, they moved carefully and spoke courteously. In the evenings, after formal duties were completed, pages might gather to review what they had observed. Elders within the household offered guidance, explaining the reasons behind certain decisions. They discussed the importance of measured speech in delicate negotiations, the value of patience in settling disputes, and the weight of promises. Pages absorbed these lessons, adding them to their growing understanding of their role as future leaders. To understand why training was so rigorous, one must consider the times in which these young warriors lived. Japan was marked by alternating periods of strife and calm. In earlier centuries, during the wars between rival clans, warriors were required to defend their lands and expand their influence. Castles dotted the scenery, and alliances shifted frequently. Under such conditions, a young man needed to be ready for battle at any moment. His training reflected the realities of sudden conflict, where alertness and swift action could mean survival. Later, during extended peace under a unified government, the role of the warrior shifted. Though the threat of war diminished, the importance of discipline remained. Many warriors took on administrative roles, collecting taxes, overseeing road repairs, and resolving disputes among farmers. Training continued, albeit with more emphasis on etiquette, record-keeping, and cultural arts. Though swords might remain sheathed for years, the internal discipline cultivated during childhood made certain that these men could adapt to new responsibilities without losing their sense of identity. The shift between war and peace did not lessen the importance of early upbringing. Leaders understood that strong foundations in virtue, respect, and skill created stable communities. Households, for this reason, maintained strict routines, whether conflict was near or far. Foreign ideas profoundly shaped domestic teachings. Confucian texts, brought from continental Asia, offered frameworks for understanding human relationships and governance. Teachers used these writings to illustrate hierarchical bonds, ruler to subject, father to son, husband to wife, elder brother to younger, and between friends. These bonds were not meant to suppress individuality, but to promote harmony within a structured society. At the same time, native philosophies and religious traditions influenced training. Shinto beliefs stressed respect for ancestors and the spirits in nature. Students performed rituals at shrines, thanking the kami for protection and guidance. Zen Buddhism introduced meditation practices that quieted the mind and encouraged direct insight. The combination of these traditions created a rich, intricate weave of thought that guided behavior. The blending of imported and indigenous ideas reflected the adaptability of the warrior class. They adopted what suited their needs as preserving local customs. This synthesis was reflected in the balance between austere training and appreciation of poetry, between unwavering loyalty and open-hearted compassion. Though much attention is given to male warriors, women in these families played important roles. Daughters of warriors were trained to manage households with efficiency. They oversaw budgets, supervised servants, and made certain that stores of rice and other supplies were sufficient. They learned to read ledgers and correspond with officials regarding taxes. Household management required both practicality and diplomacy. When men were away on campaigns or engaged in service, women kept estates running smoothly. In addition to domestic skills, some women learned combat. Wielding a naginata allowed them to protect the home and community. Tales of women who defended castles alongside male warriors illustrate their courage. Their training stressed awareness and control. They were taught to stay calm in the face of danger and to respond decisively. The respect accorded to such women was evident in stories passed down through generations. As their names are less known than those of male generals, their contributions were necessary. They encouraged sons in virtues and provided wise counsel. They too served as exemplars of fortitude, proving that honor and duty were not confined to one gender. Historical records and legends preserve examples of individuals whose paths illustrate the impact of strict upbringing. Uesugi Kenshin, known for his tactical skill and sense of justice, reportedly began training in his early teens. His elders recognized his potential and made certain that he received instruction in both martial and administrative arts. He spent countless hours practicing archery and reading military texts, laying the groundwork for his later achievements. Another figure often mentioned is Tomoe Gozen, a woman warrior celebrated for her bravery during conflicts in the 12th century. Stories suggest that she was trained from childhood to ride horses and wield the bow. Though details vary, her reputation demonstrates that discipline and courage could flourish in those who embraced their training fully. These examples, whether factual or embellished by storytellers, served as models for later generations. Parents recounted their deeds to inspire children. The message was clear. Through dedication and adherence to moral principles, one could rise to meet the challenges of the world. Strictness in upbringing did not equate to cruelty, but it did involve clear expectations and consequences. Children who broke household rules might be assigned extra chores or asked to reflect on their actions. Public reprimand was rare. Most corrections occurred privately, preserving dignity as instilling accountability. The aim was to teach self-restraint rather than induce shame. On occasion, more serious breaches of conduct had lasting repercussions. A young man who neglected his duties or dishonored his family could find his opportunities limited. Elders might withhold participation in certain ceremonies until he demonstrated improvement. Conversely, exemplary conduct opened doors to greater responsibilities. This system of feedback encouraged mindful action. Discipline extended to financial behavior as well. Young warriors learned to live within means, to avoid extravagance, and to think about the welfare of their retainers. Wastefulness was seen as a sign of poor character. Through small daily practices, such as mending clothing rather than discarding it, self-control became ingrained. Reflecting on the strict upbringing of a warrior in pre-modern Japan reveals a world shaped by duty and devotion. Each lesson, from the first handling of a wooden sword to the solemn rites of adulthood, forged a character capable of facing uncertainty. The balance between martial skill and cultural refinement created individuals who could navigate courts and battlefields with equal poise. Their lives were not easy, but they were guided by values that offered clarity in times of confusion. This historical path continues to influence perceptions of discipline and honor today. As modern lives differ greatly from those of ancient warriors, the underlying principles of respect, perseverance, and community responsibility remain relevant. Parents who teach by example, teachers who demand both effort and kindness, and students who commit to developing body and mind can find inspiration in these traditions. As this narrative comes to a close, imagine once more the training hall at twilight. The mats have been swept, the wooden swords placed back on the racks, and the lanterns emit a gentle glow. Outside, the garden settles into evening, and a cool breeze stirs the leaves. A sense of calm pervades the space. In that calm, one can appreciate the quiet strength cultivated through years of dedicated practice. Good creation of a warrior's blade was an art form that mirrored the discipline of the person who would one day wield it. Swordsmiths dedicated their lives to mastering the intricate process of transforming raw steel into a weapon that was not only effective, but imbued with symbolic meaning. In secluded forges, smiths tended fires that had to be kept at exact temperatures. Iron, sand, and charcoal were combined to make tamahagane, a type of steel known for its purity. The steel was heated until glowing, hammered flat, folded upon itself, and hammered again. This folding process removed impurities and created layers that granted strength and flexibility. Each hammer strike rang through the forge, a measured rhythm learned through years of apprenticeship. The smith's focus did not waver. As he worked, he maintained awareness of the color of the metal, adjusting heat and timing to achieve the desired properties. Apprentices assisted by pumping bellows, carrying water, and learning to observe the subtle cues that signaled when to quench or reheat. The quenching itself was a dramatic moment. The glowing blade was plunged into water or oil, causing steam to rise and the metal to harden. The smith might cover parts of the blade with clay before quenching to create a differential hardening effect, producing a distinct line along the edge known as the hamen. After forging, polishing began. Polishing stones of varying grits were used to bring out the blade's features. This stage could take weeks. The polisher revealed the hamen and refined the edge until it was sharp. The result was both practical and beautiful. A sword was not just a tool for combat, it represented the spirit of the warrior class. Many families commissioned blades from renowned smiths and passed them down through generations. A young warrior learned the history of his family's sword, respecting it as a symbol of duty. He learned to clean and oil it, to wrap the hilt properly, and to store it correctly. When a boy first received a real blade, often during his coming-of-age ceremony, he did so with a sense of awe. He was reminded that the sword embodied the spirit of his ancestors and the skills of the smith. Carrying it was an honor that demanded responsible behavior. Instructors taught him how to draw the blade in a single smooth motion, how to hold it with steady hands, and how to return it to its scabbard without looking. They reminded him that the sword should never be drawn lightly. Such lessons reinforced mindfulness and humility. The relationship between warrior and sword extended beyond training. In quiet moments, he might sit and simply hold the blade across his knees, contemplating the weight of his obligations. The polished steel reflected flickering candlelight, serving as a mirror in which he could examine his conscience. This practice encouraged introspection. It reminded him that skill with a weapon must be matched by moral clarity. Armor was another important aspect of a warrior's equipment. Designed to protect without excessively hindering movement, armor evolved over centuries. Early armor consisted of small metal plates laced together with leather or silk cords. These plates overlapped like the scales of a fish, distributing the force of blows across a wider area. Later, larger plates were added to protect crucial areas such as the chest and shoulders. A complete set included a helmet, mask, cuirass, sleeves, thigh guards, and shin guards. Crafting armor required skilled artisans who understood both metalwork and lacquer. The metal plates had to be shaped to fit the curves of the body. Leather or silk cords were dyed in clan colors and woven through holes in the plates. The result was strong, yet flexible. Lacquer was applied to protect the metal from wetness and to give the armor a sheen. The helmet, often elaborate, featured crests and ornaments that identified the wearer's clan and status. Some helmets included face plates with fierce expressions designed to intimidate opponents. Beneath the helmet, a warrior wore padding to cushion impacts. Donning armor was a ritual in itself. Assistants helped fasten the various components, starting with the undergarments and working outward. Straps were tied in a specific order to distribute weight evenly. The process could take considerable time, but it offered an opportunity for mental preparation. As each piece was secured, the warrior mentally reviewed his responsibilities and his strategy for the upcoming engagement. Once fully equipped, he tested his range of motion, swinging his arms and bending his knees. Maintaining armor was part of training. After use, it was cleaned thoroughly to remove dirt and sweat. Cord bindings were checked for wear, and any damaged plates were repaired. A young warrior learned to value the craftsman who created his armor and to treat their work with respect. He understood that neglecting maintenance could lead to failure in critical moments. Through this attention to detail, he developed an appreciation for craftsmanship and a sense of responsibility for his gear. A typical day in the life of a young warrior was tightly structured. It began in the pre-dawn darkness. Lamps were lit and the household stirred. The day started with personal hygiene and a short period of quiet reflection. He might sit facing the east, counting breaths as the first light appeared over the horizon. This allowed his mind to settle before the demands of the day. Breakfast followed. Meals were simple, often consisting of rice, pickled vegetables, and occasionally fish or miso soup. Eating was not hurried, and conversation was kept minimal. After breakfast, he attended to household chores. This could involve sweeping corridors, bringing water from wells, or assisting elders with small tasks. These chores were not viewed as menial, but as part of training. They instilled humility and reinforced the idea that service began at home. The morning training session came next. It typically began with physical conditioning, running in the courtyard, lifting wooden logs to build strength, and performing stretches to improve flexibility. After warming up, students moved to specific skills. For sword work, they practiced footwork drills and cutting exercises. For archery, they spent time on the range. For spear practice, they drilled with partners, learning to coordinate thrusts and parries. Midday brought a break. The young warriors returned to the house, washed, and shared a meal. Afterwards, study time ensued. In study rooms, they reviewed texts and wrote calligraphy. Teachers read aloud from historical chronicles, and students copied passages. Discussions of ethics and strategy followed. The afternoon often included lessons in cultural arts. The tea ceremony, poetry writing, or musical instruments might be on the schedule. These practices allowed the body to rest as engaging the mind and spirit. Late afternoon saw a second session of physical training, often focusing on endurance. Running longer distances, practicing under more challenging conditions, or sparring at a faster pace helped build stamina. As the sun set, chores resumed. Armor was cleaned, weapons were oiled, and training spaces were tidied. Dinner was shared with family or fellow trainees. In the evening, there might be storytelling by elders or further study. Before sleeping, another period of reflection or meditation took place. The day ended early by modern standards, but the routine was repeated day after day, gradually building skill and character. Seasonal changes brought varied lessons. In spring, when cherry blossoms opened and the air was mild, outdoor training felt invigorating. The sight of blossoms drifting to the ground reminded students of the transience of life, reinforcing the value of each moment. Running through fields newly green strengthened legs, and practicing archery under blossoming branches sharpened focus amid distraction. Summer introduced heat and humidity. Sweat dripped constantly, and shade became precious. Training continued regardless. Learning to keep a steady grip on a sword when palms were slick or to draw a bow with arms tired from heat taught perseverance. Students drank water sparingly, mindful of limited wells, and their instructors watched for signs of exhaustion. Evening sessions were sometimes extended to take advantage of cooler temperatures. Insects buzzed around lanterns as students practiced cuts and forms in the dim light. Autumn offered crisp air and clear skies. Leaves turned bright colors, and the scent of smoke from harvested fields carried through valleys. The cooler air invigorated bodies worn by summer heat. This was often a time for long-distance riding and running, building endurance. Archery practice benefited from steady winds, and the changing colors provided inspiration for poetry sessions. Winter brought challenges. Snow fell, covering training grounds and making footwork slippery. Handling a bow or sword with numb fingers tested determination. Students learned to wear layers and to warm their limbs before practice. They shoveled snow to clear paths and built fires after sessions to thaw hands. This season stressed resilience. Moving through snowdrifts built leg strength, and breathing cold air taught control. At night, long hours of darkness provided extended periods for reading and meditation. By training through all seasons, warriors became accustomed to performing under any conditions. Religious observances formed an integral part of the calendar. Shrines and temples dotted the countryside and town streets, serving as places to offer gratitude, seek guidance, and mark key events. Families often visited local shrines at the beginning of the year to pray for health and success. They performed purification rituals, washing hands and rinsing mouths, and offered coins at the altar. Bells were rung to attract the attention of the gods, and prayers were whispered in silence. Seasonal festivals provided breaks from daily routines and reinforced community bonds. During these events, training was sometimes paused to allow participation. Lanterns were hung along paths, and music filled the air. Young warriors joined villagers in carrying portable shrines through streets, demonstrating strength and coordination in a context different from combat. Oban, a summer festival honoring ancestors, held special significance. Families lit lanterns and placed them on rivers or in front of houses, guiding ancestral spirits. Stories of past family members were told by candlelight, connecting children with their heritage. This reminder of lineage reinforced a sense of belonging and responsibility to those who came before. Rituals around planting and harvesting, too, involved warriors. They participated in prayers for a good crop, and in some cases, supervised laborers. This connection to the land reminded them that their swords, in the end, protected those who grew food. Such involvement instilled gratitude for the farmers whose work sustained the community. Within a clan, relationships were carefully ordered. The head of the family, often the eldest male, held authority. His decisions guided the lives of his children, younger siblings, and retainers. Respect for elders was deeply ingrained. Younger members did not speak out of turn, but they were encouraged to ask questions in private, seeking clarification and guidance. The exchange of knowledge flowed downward through generations. Older siblings often served as mentors. An elder brother might supervise training, correct posture, or demonstrate techniques. He would share stories of his own mistakes and lessons, helping younger siblings avoid similar missteps. In turn, younger siblings assisted older ones with chores and respected their instructions. These interactions built trust and cooperation. Retainers and servants formed another layer of relationships. They supported the household through cooking, cleaning, farming, and caretaking. Warriors treated them with courtesy, recognizing that without their efforts, the estate could not function. In return, retainers trusted their leaders to protect them and govern fairly. This reciprocal relationship reinforced loyalty. The lord of the clan occupied a position at the top of this hierarchy. His authority extended over multiple families, and his decisions influenced the welfare of entire regions. Young warriors learned to serve him with dedication. They observed how their fathers interacted with the Lord, paying attention to etiquette and the subtle nuances of conversation. Through these observations, they internalized the protocols of service. Beyond formal exercises, warriors trained in survival and navigation. Young men learned to read maps and to orient themselves using landmarks, stars, and the sun. In mountainous areas, they studied the shape of ridges and the flow of streams. They practiced crossing rivers, sometimes wading through swift currents with ropes tied around waists for safety. They learned to build makeshift bridges from logs and rope. In wooded areas, they learned to identify edible plants and to set simple traps. They were taught to start fires using flint and tinder, to find shelter under trees or rocky overhangs, and to make bedding from leaves and grass. These skills were necessary when traveling or when battle conditions required them to live off the land. Night training sharpened senses. Under moonlight, groups moved silently through forests, avoiding dry branches and watching for obstacles. Instructors sometimes scattered small bells along paths. Stepping on one signaled a lapse in attention. Through such exercises, warriors learned to trust their hearing and their peripheral vision. Mountains served as venues for endurance hikes. Carrying packs filled with stones, students climbed steep trails, building strength. At the summit, they took in wide views of valleys and villages, connecting physical exertion with strategic understanding. They saw how terrain influenced movement and how natural features could be used to advantage. Cultural arts expanded beyond tea and calligraphy. Music played a role in refined circles. Some warriors learned to play the flute or the biwa, a short-necked lute. Sitting in a quiet room, they practiced melodies that had been handed down for centuries. Music required careful breathing and finger control, offering yet another method for disciplining the mind. It provided a means to express feelings that could not be conveyed through words. Painting offered another outlet. Warriors studied brush techniques to depict sceneries, birds, and flowers. Using monochrome ink, they captured mountains in mist or a branch weighed down by snow. The simplicity of ink painting mirrored Zen principles, encouraging artists to convey essence rather than detail. Painting taught observation, as artists spent time studying their subjects before touching brush to paper. Poetry remained a mainstay. Composing waka or haiku allowed warriors to distill experiences into a few lines. They exchanged poems with friends and mentors, sometimes as part of correspondence. A verse might describe the feeling of drawing a bow under a full moon or the sound of rain on armor. Through poetry, they shared glimpses of daily life, forging bonds through shared appreciation of beauty. Garden design was another pursuit that combined art and philosophy. Some warriors oversaw the creation of gardens on their estates. These gardens featured carefully placed rocks, raked gravel, moss, and water elements. The arrangement reflected natural sceneries and invited contemplation. Creating and maintaining such spaces encouraged patience and a sense of harmony with nature. Walking through a garden after a day of training offered a restorative experience, reminding the individual of the balance between order and fluidity. Serving as a page in a lord's residence often lasted for several years. During this time, a young man learned much about politics and diplomacy. He observed how alliances were formed, how disputes were settled, and how resources were allocated. Standing at attention behind his lord during meetings, he remained still and silent, absorbing the flow of conversation. He learned to recognize subtle shifts in tone and body language that signaled agreement or tension. Pages were sometimes asked to deliver sensitive messages. Carrying a sealed document through crowded streets or along rural paths required awareness and discretion. They traveled on foot or horseback, navigating through markets and villages. At each stop, they announced themselves formally and waited respectfully until granted entry. Such journeys taught independence and decision-making. If confronted with obstacles on the road, they had to determine whether to wait, seek an alternate route, or request assistance. Not all tasks involved serious matters. Pages prepared tea for their lord, arranged flowers in reception rooms, and organized entertainment for guests. These duties required creativity and a keen sense of atmosphere. They learned which musical pieces were appropriate for formal dinners, which poems might lighten a tense conversation, and how to adjust seating to honor rank. Attention to such details displayed thoughtfulness and strengthened relationships. During their service, pages formed bonds with other young men from different families. They exchanged ideas, shared experiences, and sometimes developed rivalries. These connections formed networks that lasted throughout their adult lives. When they returned to their own families, they carried knowledge and friendships that would prove valuable in managing their own estates or serving their lords in more prominent roles. The society within which these warriors lived was complex. At the top was the emperor, revered as a symbol of continuity. Below him, real power often lay with the shogun, the military leader who governed the land through alliances with powerful lords. The lords, or daimyo, controlled domains that varied in size and wealth. Their income came from rice harvests and taxes. Within each domain, hierarchies existed. High-ranking retainers served as advisors, accountants, and commanders. Mid-ranking warriors oversaw smaller villages, making certain that tax quotas were met and that roads were maintained. Lower-ranking retainers managed warehouses, supervised crop collection, and commanded small groups of soldiers. Farmers, artisans, and merchants occupied positions outside the warrior class but were necessary to the economy. Understanding this structure was critical for young warriors. They learned about land measurement, tax assessment, and the importance of balancing strictness with compassion. During times when banditry threatened trade routes, warriors coordinated patrols. In periods of famine, they oversaw the distribution of stored grain. Their education for this reason included arithmetic, law, and the study of precedents in governance. The balance of power among lords could shift quickly. Marriage alliances created bonds between domains, and the exchange of hostages made certain loyalty. A page watching his lord negotiate such agreements observed how words were chosen carefully and how gifts were exchanged. He saw that strength alone did not secure peace. Wisdom and patience were equally important. Training stressed different skills at different points in history. In early centuries, mounted archery was the defining feature of warfare. Warriors on horseback used longbows to rain arrows on enemies from a distance. Training in those times focused on developing balance on horseback, controlling the mount with knees, and shooting accurately from moving platforms. Younger trainees spent hours practicing horseback riding without arms outstretched, learning to stand in the stirrups and rotate their torsos as keeping the horse steady. They practiced nocking arrows and drawing the bow with quick, fluid movements. Swords served as secondary weapons then. They were shorter and straighter, meant for close quarters after an exchange of arrows or when bows broke. As warfare evolved into battles of foot soldiers and castle sieges, emphasis shifted toward swordsmanship. Blades became curved to allow for more efficient cutting motions. Training adapted to this change. Footwork drills became more varied, incorporating turning, sliding, and adjusting stance quickly. The spear gained prominence on foot battlefields. Its longer reach allowed fighters to keep opponents at bay. Young warriors learned to coordinate spear thrusts in formation, aligning with fellow soldiers to create a wall of points. They practiced switching between spear and sword, depending on range and terrain. Through these shifts, training methods remained grounded in repetition and discipline. Teachers adapted to the needs of the day, passing down knowledge relevant to current challenges as maintaining core values. Students learned that mastery required flexibility, not only of body, but of mind. Foreign contact introduced new elements to warrior life. The arrival of traders from overseas in the 16th century brought matchlock firearms. Initially strange and sometimes regarded with suspicion, these weapons gradually changed tactics. Young warriors began to learn how to handle firearms along with traditional weapons. They practiced loading powder and shot, igniting the match, and firing accurately. The slow rate of fire required them to protect themselves with shields or to fire from behind barricades. Instructors stressed safety and control. Mishandling gunpowder could cause accidents. Training included maintaining clean barrels and storing powder properly. Though some viewed firearms as dishonorable, owing to their ability to kill from a distance without direct confrontation, others recognized their practicality. Over time, armies began to integrate rows of gunners into formations, firing volleys before moving in with swords and spears. This adaptation did not eliminate traditional skills. Even as guns appeared on battlefields, archery and swordsmanship remained important. In fact, learning multiple weapon systems improved a warrior's versatility. He could choose the appropriate tool for different contexts. In quieter periods, firearms training might be de-stressed, yet the knowledge remained part of the collective memory. The class faced profound changes in the 19th century. Political reforms aimed at modernizing the nation led to the dismantling of the social order that had supported hereditary warriors. The government abolished the stipends that had sustained families and banned the wearing of swords in public. Many warriors were faced with the need to find new livelihoods. Some became bureaucrats, teachers, or officers in a national army. Others struggled to adjust and resisted the loss of status. In spite of these changes, the legacy of their upbringing persisted. The values instilled through years of strict training did not vanish. Former warriors continued to stress education, discipline, and loyalty in their families. They opened schools, taught martial arts to new generations, and preserved stories of the past. The emphasis on self-improvement and community service influenced modern institutions. In literature and theater, depictions of ancient warriors became popular. Plays and novels romanticized their lives, highlighting honor and sacrifice. Though some accounts exaggerated, they kept memory alive. Modern martial arts schools trace their lineage back to these traditions, teaching techniques and philosophies adapted for contemporary life. As societies changed, the essence of the training, its commitment to growth, respect, and responsibility, continued to resonate. No warrior could survive without farmers and artisans. The economic foundation of a domain rested on the labor of those who tilled the soil, harvested crops, and crafted goods. Young men were taught to respect this labor. They learned about irrigation systems, rice planting schedules, and the hardships faced during droughts or floods. They joined in harvest festivals, carrying bundles of rice and offering thanks to those who grew it. Artisans provided swords, armor, pottery, and fabric. Apprenticing with a craftsman revealed the patience required to produce quality items. Watching a potter shape clay on a wheel, a young warrior saw parallels with his own training. Both required repetition, attention to detail, and an understanding of materials. When he wore silk dyed by a master or drank from a cup fired in a kiln, he carried with him the labor of others. Market days brought people from different walks of life together. Warriors patrolled market streets to maintain order, but they too observed the exchange of goods and ideas. This exposure broadened their awareness of the interconnectedness of the community. They saw how merchants imported salt and fish from coastal regions, how carpenters shaped timber for new houses, and how every person contributed to the prosperity of the domain. Through these interactions, warriors gained humility. They understood that their swords protected more than honor. They safeguarded the livelihoods of many. This realization reinforced the moral teachings they had received and the need to act with fairness in administration. As one reflects on the meticulous training and structured life of a young warrior, an appreciation grows for the depth of preparation behind each movement and decision. From the first lessons in bowing and holding a wooden sword to the complexities of court service, each experience layered skill upon character. The quiet repetition of strokes and calligraphy mirrored the repetition of sword cuts. Both shaped the mind and body in tandem. These individuals lived through times of turmoil and peace, adapting their skills to suit the needs of their communities. Their upbringing produced people capable of leadership, whether on the field or behind a desk. The values of respect, duty, and perseverance provided stability. The beauty of their arts offered solace. The strict schedules that defined their days became rhythms that encouraged balance. Today, as modern life moves at a different pace, some may find comfort in reading about these practices. The emphasis on mindful repetition, on combining physical exercise with artistic expression, and on serving a purpose larger than oneself offers lessons that transcend time. The training of old did not simply create fighters, it cultivated individuals who could bring calm to chaotic moments and see the larger picture in everyday tasks. When one considers the quiet interior of a temple, the rustle of bamboo leaves outside a dojo, or the soft drip of water in a garden basin, one can almost hear the echoes of those long ago. Their footsteps have faded, but their presence lingers in the traditions passed down. In the end, the strict upbringing of a warrior was about more than preparing for battle. It was a pathway to inner strength and harmony. Zen practice sat at the heart of many training regimens. Though rooted in Buddhism, Zen in the warrior's context was less about ritual and more about direct experience. In a meditation hall, rows of students sat facing walls, backs straight, knees folded. An instructor walked slowly behind them, carrying a flat stick. Should a student's posture slump or attention wander, he received a light tap on the shoulders, not as punishment, but as a reminder to return to the present. Meditation sessions varied in length. Sometimes they lasted half an hour, at other times they extended into the night. The objective was to quiet the internal chatter that distracts the mind. Instructors spoke of clearing the mind as one would clear leaves from a path after a storm. This process was not about suppressing thought, but about noticing thoughts without attaching to them. As the mind settled, awareness of breathing deepened. Teachers sometimes offered koans, paradoxical questions meant to break habitual patterns of thinking. A student might be asked to think about the sound of one hand clapping or to explain the original face he had before birth. These questions had no logical answer. Their purpose was to push the mind beyond logic and into direct insight. Sitting with such questions for days or weeks encouraged patience. The sudden realization that could follow was not easily expressed in words, but it brought a sense of clarity that influenced everyday life. Zen practice extended beyond the meditation hall. Students were encouraged to bring mindfulness to daily activities. When sweeping floors, they focused solely on the movement of the broom. When chopping wood, they paid attention to the weight of the axe and the sound of the blade striking. Through such practices, training became integrated into life. This approach to mindfulness had practical benefits. On the battlefield or during negotiations, a calm mind could respond appropriately without being overwhelmed by fear or anger. The ability to focus on one action at a time improved accuracy in archery and precision in sword work. The insight gained from koans nurtured intuitive decision-making. The art of archery, called kyudo, was considered more than a technical skill. It was a path to moral and spiritual development. Instruction followed a structured sequence of movements known as the 8 stages of shooting. These stages included placing the feet correctly, aligning the body, raising the bow, drawing, holding, releasing, and completing the shot with composure. Each stage flowed into the next with no haste. Before drawing, the archer bowed to the target and to the instructor. This bow represented respect for the practice and for the tradition. The archer then took his place on the shooting line, feet shoulder-width apart, toes pointed slightly outward. He placed the arrow on the string and raised the bow above his head, arms fully extended. During this stage, he maintained awareness of posture and breathing. The draw began with lowering the bow to shoulder height and simultaneously pulling the string back. The arrow was drawn past the cheek, and the archer's gaze fixed on the center of the target. At full draw, muscles engaged across the back, and the chest opened. The hold required stillness. Instructors taught students to feel the tension evenly distributed between both arms and to be mindful of their center. Release was not a sudden snap, but a relaxed letting go. The string slipped from the glove with minimal disturbance, sending the arrow forward along a smooth path. After release, the follow-through, called zanshin, was crucial. The archer remained still, arms outstretched, watching the arrow's flight. This moment allowed reflection on the quality of the shot. Even in cases where the arrow did not hit the center, the focus remained on maintaining composure. Practice often took place in long halls that opened onto gardens. Targets were placed at varying distances. Archers walked slowly to the line, conscious of each step. Noise was minimal. The rhythm of multiple archers drawing and releasing created a serene atmosphere. Over time, the repetitive discipline encouraged patience and fine muscle control. The tools of the archer were crafted with equal care. Bows were composed of layers of bamboo, wood, and sometimes horn. Craftsmen selected bamboo with straight grain and cured it to remove wetness. They then cut strips of wood and laminated them with natural adhesives. The layered structure gave the bow strength to withstand repeated tension and release. After shaping, the bow was left to season, allowing the layers to bond fully. Finishing touches included wrapping certain sections with rattan for reinforcement. Arrows required careful assembly. Shafts were made from lightweight woods, straightened by heating and bending. Fletchers attached feathers from cranes, eagles, or other birds to the end of the shaft using silk thread and glue made from natural materials. The feathers guided the arrow's flight, stabilizing it. Arrowheads varied depending on purpose. Broadheads were used for war, as smaller heads served for target practice. Some arrowheads had barbs, others were designed to whistle in flight as signals. Craftsmen tempered the metal for strength and sharpened edges meticulously. The relationship between archer and fletcher resembled that of warrior and swordsmith. Without reliable arrows, training lost meaning. Young archers learned to repair damaged fletching and to store arrows carefully. They were taught to inspect each arrow for straightness and to understand how slight variations in weight or feather length could affect flight. By taking responsibility for their equipment, they deepened their connection to the practice. Calligraphy, or shodo, encompassed multiple styles, each demanding precision and expressiveness. Teachers introduced students first to kaisho, a block style emphasizing clarity. Writing in kaisho involved composing each stroke carefully, making certain correct angle and length. This style built a strong foundation. Once students gained confidence, they moved to gyosho, a semi-cursive script. In gyosho, strokes flowed together more naturally, requiring control and rhythm. The most advanced style, sosho, or grass script, resembled flowing lines that seemed almost abstract. Mastering sosho required not only technical skill, but an ability to convey spirit through brushwork. Different papers and brushes produced different effects. Fine paper absorbed ink slowly, allowing for crisp lines, whereas rougher paper created textured strokes. Brushes varied in stiffness and thickness. A soft brush created broad strokes with varying width. A stiffer brush produced more uniform lines. Students experimented with these tools to understand how each responded to pressure and speed. Calligraphy sessions were conducted in silence. Before beginning, students ground ink on a stone with water, creating a rich black liquid. The process of grinding served to focus the mind. When ready, they dipped the brush and made the first stroke. Teachers observed posture and breathing. They encouraged students to read aloud the text they were writing, internalizing both its meaning and its form. Mistakes were not erased. A new sheet was taken, and the character attempted again. This taught acceptance and perseverance. Students sometimes practiced the same character dozens of times in one session. Even after years of study, masters continued to refine their brushwork, finding new ways to express energy through strokes. The tea ceremony, or chanoyu, involved more than serving a drink. It encompassed architecture, utensils, and etiquette. The tea room was small, often with a low entrance requiring guests to bow as they entered, symbolizing humility. The interior featured tatami mats, a sunken hearth, and an alcove displaying a scroll or flower arrangement chosen to reflect the season or theme of the gathering. Natural materials dominated the space, creating a sense of simplicity. The host prepared utensils with care. A kettle made of iron or bronze hung over the hearth. A bamboo ladle rested nearby to scoop water. The tea bowl, chosen to complement the season, could be rustic or refined. A small caddy contained powdered tea, and a bamboo scoop measured it. Each item had a specific place and was handled with respect. The procedure followed a pattern. The host entered quietly, bowed to the guests, and carried utensils into the room. He cleaned each item before the guests' eyes, using a silk cloth. This act of cleansing was not only hygienic, but symbolic of purity. He then scooped tea powder into the bowl, added hot water, and whisked the mixture into a frothy brew using a bamboo whisk. He turned the bowl so that the most beautiful side faced the guest and offered it. Guests received the bowl with gratitude, bowed, and rotated it slightly before drinking to avoid putting their lips on the front. They took a few sips, wiped the rim, and passed it to the next guest. Conversation was minimal and, when present, focused on the utensils, the season, or a related poem. This controlled atmosphere encouraged mindfulness. Learning the tea ceremony required memorizing numerous gestures and their meanings. Students practiced folding the cloth, handling the ladle, and whisking the tea. They learned to coordinate their actions with breathing and to move without haste. Over time, performing the ceremony became a meditation in motion. For warriors, it provided a respite from training and a reminder that grace and awareness were qualities to cultivate off the battlefield. Poetry served as a bridge between the inner world and outer experience. Classical forms, such as tanka, consisted of 5 lines with a pattern of syllables. Writing in this form required condensing an observation into few words. Warriors composed verses about dew on a blade, the echo of footsteps in a corridor, or the call of a distant bird. The structure imposed discipline as the content allowed freedom of expression. Renga, or linked verse, involved collaboration. One person wrote an opening stanza, and others followed, creating a chain of poems. This collaborative form encouraged community and taught participants to build upon each other's ideas. Renga gatherings could last hours, with participants reflecting on themes of love, nature, and impermanence. Haiku, though later in origin, shared similar qualities. In just 3 lines, a poet captured a moment in time. Warriors used this form to express fleeting impressions. A falling leaf, the way smoke curled from incense, the feeling before drawing a bow. Short verse sharpened perception. It trained the mind to notice subtle details and to find meaning in them. Verses were exchanged as gifts. A poem composed during training might be sent to a friend serving in another province. In letters, writers embedded poems to convey sentiments indirectly. Understanding and composing poetry improved communication skills. It allowed warriors to convey gratitude, apology, or encouragement with elegance. Studying poetry too involved reading ancient anthologies. Students memorized works from imperial collections and from poets who wrote of battles, journeys, and everyday scenes. These readings connected them with a literary lineage and provided inspiration for their own writing. Nature served as an ever-present instructor. Warriors learned to observe the sky to anticipate weather changes. The direction of wind influenced archery and sailing. Clouds clustering in the mountains signaled rain, as a clear horizon at dawn suggested a fair day. Reading these signs helped plan travel and training sessions. Animal behavior offered clues about the environment. Birds flying low hinted at impending storms. The stillness of forests at midday told of heat. Deer moving down from high slopes in large numbers sometimes preceded snow. Observing insects revealed the season's progression. Cicadas chirping marked midsummer, as crickets signaled the approach of autumn. Warriors trained their sense of smell as well. They learned to detect the scent of smoke from distant fires, the freshness of water sources, and the musty odor that precedes a storm. In forests, they noted the smell of resin from pines or damp soil after rain. Listening skills were honed through night exercises. The rustling of leaves, the snap of twigs, and the call of nocturnal creatures allowed trainees to map their surroundings. Teachers sometimes blindfolded students and had them identify objects by touch or sound. This sharpened sensitivity improved situational awareness. Connecting with nature was not solely practical. It nurtured a sense of harmony. Many poems drew from these observations. Gardens were designed to mirror natural sceneries. Meditation sessions were held near waterfalls or under trees. Recognizing patterns in nature reinforced the philosophy that humans are part of a larger order. Spiritual beliefs varied among families. Some followed Pure Land teachings, chanting Nembutsu to express faith in the compassion of the Buddha Amitabha. Others embraced the esoteric practices of Shingon, with rituals involving mantras, mudras, and mandalas. Zen, already discussed, stressed direct experience and meditation. Shinto practices honored kami, spirits associated with natural phenomena and ancestors. Shrines dedicated to these spirits stood in groves and on mountain slopes. Rituals punctuated the year. Priests read sutras during memorial services for the dead, and families offered rice, sake, and incense at household altars. Children observed their parents performing these rites and learned their significance. Spiritual education included learning chants, understanding myths, and participating in festivals. Belief systems provided comfort and guidance. Before battle, warriors visited shrines to seek protection. They carried amulets inscribed with prayers. In times of illness, they recited sutras or sought help from itinerant monks. Spiritual teachers reminded them that earthly achievements were transient, encouraging detachment from ego. The blending of various traditions reflected the pragmatic approach of society. Individuals drew from different teachings as needed. A warrior might meditate in the Zen manner to calm his mind, chant during a memorial service, and make offerings at a Shinto shrine. This syncretism allowed spiritual practice to evolve without rigid boundaries. The lives of women in warrior households were multifaceted. They oversaw food stores, arranged marriages, educated children, and managed servants. Early in the morning, they coordinated meal preparation, making certain that rice was washed, vegetables were pickled, and soups were simmered. They supervised the spinning of silk and the weaving of cloth. They recorded household expenses and incomes in ledgers, keeping track of rice owed to tenants and goods traded with merchants. Education for girls included reading and writing, particularly of practical documents and letters. They studied household manuals that outlined how to prepare medicinal herbs, how to manage finances, and how to host guests. Some texts included instructions on etiquette for dealing with officials or negotiating dowries. Self-defense training for women used the naginata since its length provided reach. Women practiced basic stances, sweeping motions, and thrusts. They learned to maintain grip and to move their feet quickly. Instructors stressed using momentum rather than brute strength. They too practiced using knives for close protection. Though their training time was less than that of male relatives, it was sufficient to deter threats and to provide confidence. Mothers were primary teachers for young children before formal training began. They taught speech, manners, and the simple hymns recited during festivals. They corrected posture when a child sat incorrectly and reminded them to hold chopsticks properly. Through lullabies and stories, they imparted cultural knowledge. Their presence provided emotional stability, which underpinned the discipline required in later years. Older women served as advisors within the family. Their experience in managing crises, floods, famines, or conflicts made them valuable counselors. Young wives sought their guidance on resolving household disputes and maintaining harmony. Their role, though often uncelebrated, was indispensable in preserving the smooth function of households and the training of future warriors. The virtue of loyalty, known as giri, often came into tension with human feeling, referred to as ninjo. Teachers acknowledged that situations might arise where personal affection conflicted with duty. They explored such dilemmas through stories and plays. One example recounted a warrior commanded to arrest a friend who had broken the law. His heart urged him to help his friend, yet his sense of duty compelled him to fulfill his orders. In the story, the warrior chose duty, but his sorrow was evident. Training in moral discernment included discussing hypothetical scenarios. Students debated how to respond if their lord's command seemed unjust, or if family loyalty clashed with public responsibility. These discussions did not always yield clear answers. Instead, they prepared students to grapple with complexity. Written codes stressed that duty to one's lord and clan superseded personal interest. At the same time, teachings from Confucian texts reminded warriors to act with benevolence and righteousness. Balancing these principles required wisdom. Elders counseled that the honor of the group rested on each member's choices. Stories of historical figures illustrated the extremes of loyalty. Some warriors followed their lords into exile, enduring hardship rather than seeking comfort elsewhere. Others supported their lord's heir at great personal risk. These stories served as examples and as cautionary tales. They demonstrated that loyalty was not blind obedience, but a considered commitment to values and relationships. Discipline was cultivated not only through grand gestures, but through routine. Simple tasks such as arranging footwear outside the door taught orderliness. Cleaning the stable taught respect for animals. Preparing meals taught attention to detail and timing. Young warriors learned to fold their clothing neatly, to keep their sleeping area free of clutter, and to mend torn garments instead of discarding them. These practices encouraged a mindset that valued care and precision in everything. Control of speech formed another aspect of discipline. Children were taught to speak softly and to think before answering. Gossip and careless words were discouraged. In meetings, warriors waited to be addressed and listened attentively. They practiced conveying disagreement respectfully. This restraint extended to facial expressions. Maintaining a calm demeanor in the face of provocation was seen as a mark of maturity. Dietary habits reflected discipline as well. Meals were eaten at regular times. Portions were moderate, avoiding both gluttony and waste. Seasonal ingredients were used and nothing was taken for granted. Appreciation for food extended to thanking those who prepared it and those who grew it. Writing letters provided another exercise in control. Formal correspondence followed set formats. The opening lines acknowledged the recipient's health and position. The body conveyed news or requests concisely. The closing reiterated respect. Drafting such letters required thoughtfulness, and mistakes were carefully corrected before sending. Through these everyday actions, discipline became second nature. Strategic thinking formed a significant portion of advanced training. Students studied texts such as Sun Tzu's writings, which discussed deception, terrain, and the importance of knowing oneself and one's opponent. Teachers dissected these texts, applying lessons to historical battles and to personal conduct. They explored themes like the advantage of indirect tactics and the value of surprise. Students analyzed campaigns from their own history. They examined how generals used rivers, mountains, and weather to their advantage. They debated decisions made during sieges and skirmishes. Through these analyses, they learned that strategy extended beyond brute force. It included psychological insight, logistics, and timing. Board games such as Go and Shogi served as tools for developing strategic thinking. In Go, players placed stones on a grid, aiming to control territory. The simplicity of placing a single stone belied the complexity of emerging patterns. Shogi, akin to chess, involved moving pieces with different abilities across a board, capturing opponents, and promoting pieces. These games sharpened concentration, taught patience, and encouraged forward planning. Teachers connected the lessons from games to real-world scenarios. A well-timed sacrifice of a piece in shogi paralleled strategic retreats on the battlefield. The encirclement of territory in Go echoed the way armies surrounded forts. By practicing strategies in games, students developed an intuitive sense of timing and positioning that translated to larger contexts. Administrative competence required numerical skills. Warriors responsible for collecting taxes and managing estates learned basic accounting. They recorded rice yields, converted rice into currency equivalents, and calculated stipends for retainers. Abacuses were used for calculations. Teachers introduced concepts such as multiplication, division, and fractions using practical examples. Land measurement was another important skill. Fields were measured in tan and cho, units based on strides and standardized lengths. Warriors overseeing land surveys learned to use ropes and poles to mark boundaries. They recorded measurements accurately to prevent disputes. Legal knowledge complemented administrative work. Warriors learned about land rights, inheritance laws, and penalties for crimes. They studied precedents from past cases, comparing how similar disputes were resolved. This understanding helped them adjudicate conflicts among farmers or between tenants and landlords. Training in administration often involved shadowing elder officials. Young men accompanied them during inspections, listened to reports, and observed how decisions were made. They learned to prepare official documents, to store records properly, and to maintain confidentiality. This practical education made certain that when they assumed administrative roles, they could manage resources responsibly. Patience was cultivated intentionally. Archery taught waiting for the right moment to release. Meditation taught sitting quietly, even when the mind resisted. Long-term projects such as growing bonsai trees instilled patience over years. Bonsai cultivation involved pruning branches, wiring trunks, and repotting. Watching a tree develop slowly under one's care mirrored personal growth. Controlling anger was another focus. Teachers told stories of how rash decisions led to disaster. They encouraged students to pause before reacting. Breathing exercises were used to calm surging emotions. If a dispute arose, a mediator sometimes stepped in to give both parties time to cool down. Writing about grievances in a journal offered another outlet. Teachers stressed that emotions were natural but should not dominate actions. Showing anger openly could harm relationships and cloud judgment. Instead, students were taught to express concerns with measured words. This restraint did not mean suppression, but transformation. Through practice, they learned to channel strong feelings into determination and creative expression. Literature reinforced these lessons. Tales of warriors who acted impulsively served as warnings, whereas stories of those who exercised patience under provocation offered models. Through reflection on such stories, students internalized the importance of self-control. Biographies of notable leaders provided further guidance. Oda Nobunaga, born to a regional lord, was known for his unorthodox behavior in youth. Records describe him as spirited and independent. His father worried about his lack of decorum. After his father's death, Nobunaga began to display greater discipline. His upbringing included rigorous training in archery and horsemanship. Tutors exposed him to military strategy. He forged connections with talented individuals, recognizing merit beyond lineage. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, unlike many lords, came from a humble background. He did not inherit a warrior family name. His early years involved serving as a foot soldier and later as an attendant. He learned the habits of the warrior class by observation and imitation. His diligence and adaptability caught the attention of superiors. Over time, he rose through the ranks, demonstrating that strict personal discipline and keen insight could overcome social barriers. Tokugawa Ieyasu, born Matsudaira Takechiyo, experienced hardship when taken hostage as a child during clan conflicts. This time away from his family exposed him to different customs and required him to adapt quickly. He learned patience and diplomacy. Upon returning to his domain, he continued his training in martial arts and governance. His careful planning and steadfastness later allowed him to establish a stable government. These leaders illustrate diverse paths shaped by upbringing and personal choices. Studying their lives taught students that background did not predetermine destiny. Rather, continuous learning, courage, and strategic thinking mattered. By exploring their youth, young warriors saw how early experiences shaped later achievements. Learning about fortifications offered another dimension to a warrior's education. Castles were more than residences. They were defensive structures designed to withstand sieges. Young men observed masons at work stacking stone walls with interlocking shapes. They learned why walls curved inward at the base to resist ramming and why towers were positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire. They studied the layout of moats, earthworks, and gates. Engineers explained that walls alone did not guarantee safety. The design of approach roads mattered. Paths leading to the castle wound back and forth, forcing attackers to slow down and exposing them to defenders' arrows. Narrow gateways compelled attackers to enter single file, where they could be targeted from above. Storehouses were placed inside to hold rice and supplies for long periods. Water wells were dug within walls to make certain access during sieges. Apprentices learned basic geometry as they measured angles and distances. They used ropes with knots at regular intervals to mark out foundations. They observed carpenters assembling beams without nails, using joinery techniques that allowed flexibility during earthquakes. They saw how plaster mixed with sand and straw-coated walls to prevent fire from spreading. During training exercises, young warriors defended model fortifications built in fields. Teams worked together to hold gates, man towers, and manage resources. They practiced distributing arrows and water under simulated stress. In doing so, they gained an appreciation for planning and cooperation. They learned that a well-designed structure amplified the efforts of its defenders, and that understanding such designs allowed them to both defend and attack effectively. Names held deep significance. Warriors traced their lineage through generations, preserving family histories in scrolls stored in lacquered boxes. These genealogies recorded marriages, births, achievements, and alliances. Young members were taught to memorize the names of ancestors and to recite them during certain ceremonies. Knowing one's lineage encouraged a sense of identity and continuity. The process of naming a child involved careful thought. Parents often combined characters from older relatives' names to create new ones, symbolizing continuity. The character selected could reflect aspirations, bravery, wisdom, loyalty. During the coming-of-age ceremony, a young man received an adult name. This name might include a character bestowed by his lord, signifying trust. Changing names reflected shifts in status or allegiance. Genealogies, too, recorded stories of deeds and misdeeds. They served as cautionary accounts and sources of pride. Elders referred to these records when teaching lessons. If a forebear had shown compassion to villagers during a famine, his name was spoken with admiration. If another had acted with arrogance, his story served as a warning. Keeping genealogical records taught skills in calligraphy and record-keeping. Young people learned to write on durable paper, to use formal language, and to store documents safely. They understood that preserving the past was part of serving the future. Performing arts enriched cultural life. No theater with its stylized movements and masks, attracted patrons from warrior families. No plays often drew on classical literature and explored themes of loyalty, love, and the supernatural. Warriors attended performances, appreciating the subtle gestures and poetic language. Some learned to perform roles themselves, training under actors to master the controlled walk and precise hand movements characteristic of the art. Wearing a mask required the performer to convey emotion through posture and voice alone. Kabuki, which emerged later, offered a livelier alternative. Though initially popular among townspeople, it eventually drew audiences from the warrior class. Its vivid costumes, dynamic music, and elaborate plots provided entertainment and insight into commoner life. Attending Kabuki allowed warriors to see stories of merchants, courtesans, and travelers, broadening their understanding of society. Musical performances using instruments like the koto or shakuhachi created contemplative atmospheres. Warriors learned to appreciate how a single note sustained on a bamboo flute could evoke solitude or yearning. They studied how the pauses between notes held as much meaning as the sounds themselves. Some took up instruments as part of their personal cultivation. These arts taught timing, rhythm, and expression. They reinforced lessons learned in the dojo, the importance of controlled movement, awareness of space, and the ability to project inner emotion through outer form. Effective communication was crucial during peace and war. Training included learning to read and write clear messages, but it extended beyond literacy. Warriors studied codes used to convey instructions swiftly. Flag signals on hillsides, lantern arrangements at night, and horn calls across valleys were all methods for transmitting information. Each pattern had a prearranged meaning: advance, retreat, regroup, or call for reinforcements. Young warriors practiced sending and interpreting these signals. During exercises, instructors positioned students across a field. One group raised flags in sequences of color and motion. The other group interpreted and reacted accordingly. At night, they practiced arranging lanterns behind screens or along fences to communicate silently. Horn calls used specific notes or rhythms to convey messages. Learning to distinguish these signals amid battle noise required concentration. Messengers formed another link in communication. They had to ride quickly, navigate difficult terrain, and remain alert to ambush. Training for messengers included endurance riding, map reading, and memory exercises. They learned to repeat verbal messages accurately, even under pressure. In some cases, important orders were memorized rather than written to avoid interception. Communication training too stressed listening skills. During meetings, trainees learned to interpret what was said and unsaid. They noted tone, pause, and context. Understanding subtext allowed them to anticipate needs and respond appropriately. Honor influenced every interaction. Etiquette served as a guide to navigate social situations with dignity. Bowing at the proper angle conveyed respect appropriate to the rank of the person greeted. A deeper bow indicated deference to someone of higher status. Young children practiced bowing daily until it became habitual. Gift-giving followed specific customs. Presents were wrapped carefully in cloth and presented with both hands. The giver apologized for the modesty of the gift, regardless of its value, demonstrating humility. The receiver initially declined, then accepted after polite insistence. The manner of exchange mattered more than the item itself, reflecting mutual respect and strengthening bonds. Speech patterns included honorifics that indicated the relationship between speakers. Using the correct form showed awareness of social structure. Even within the family, younger members used respectful language when addressing elders. Elders responded with affection, tempered with formality. Dining etiquette involved waiting for the highest-ranking person to lift his chopsticks before eating. Food was taken from shared plates using serving chopsticks and placed on one's dish before eating. Leaving rice in the bowl was discouraged, as it signified ingratitude. Drinking sake followed ritualized patterns, filling a companion's cup and allowing him to reciprocate. These actions cultivated attentiveness and reinforced social harmony. Imagine a full day at a training camp. Before dawn, the camp is still. Stars glimmer overhead, and a faint chill lingers in the air. In darkness, a boy rises, folds his sleeping mat, and ties his clothing. Outside his tent, the ground is cool beneath his feet. The smell of damp earth mixes with the faint smoke from embers left from the night before. As the horizon reddens, the camp stirs. The sound of footsteps on gravel, muted voices, and the rustle of straw mats being rolled up fills the air. A bell rings, its tone clear in the morning silence, signaling the beginning of the day. The boy walks toward the communal washing area. Water drawn from a nearby stream runs over smooth stones. He cups his hands, splashes his face, and inhales the crisp air. Breakfast is simple: rice, pickled radish, and miso soup served in lacquered bowls. Sitting on the ground, he eats slowly, mindful of each bite. Around him, others sit in rows, eating quietly. After the meal, bowls are cleaned and stored. The sun now peeks over the trees, casting long shadows across the practice field. Training begins with stretching. Arms extend overhead, bodies bend forward, and legs are warmed with squats. Then comes running. The group circles the field, bare feet pressing into packed earth. Breaths cloud in cold air or disappear into summer humidity. The pace quickens, then slows. Sweating lightly, they move to sword drills. The wooden swords feel familiar in their hands. Instructors call out sequences, and the group follows. Step, strike, pivot, block. The sound of wood meeting wood echoes rhythmically. A break allows for water and a moment to rest. Sitting under a tree, the boy watches sunbeams filter through leaves. Cicadas chirp in summer, or birds sing in spring. He feels the rough bark against his back. Fingers trace patterns in the dust. The short rest restores energy. Next is archery. Bows taller than the boy stand, propped against racks. He selects one, checks the string, and stands at the line. His feet dig into the ground for stability. With deliberate movements, he raises, draws, and releases. The arrow arcs toward a straw target, striking with a soft thud. He breathes out, lowers his bow, and reflects on his form. Instructors offer quiet guidance, adjusting his elbow or advising on gaze. Midday brings study. The boy sits with others in the shade, scrolls open before them. They recite passages, copy characters, and listen to lessons on history and ethics. The scratch of brushes on paper and the drone of cicadas create a background hum. Occasionally, a teacher pauses to ask questions, inviting them to think deeper. Afternoon training focuses on group drills. Spears are distributed and lines form. The boy feels the weight of the spear, heavier than his sword. Commands are given, and the group advances, thrusting in unison. Dust rises around their feet. The sun lowers in the sky, casting golden light. As shadows lengthen, training winds down. Equipment is cleaned and stored. The boy carries water buckets, feeling muscles ache. At the communal area, he shares a meal with companions. Laughter emerges, soft but genuine. Stories are exchanged about training mistakes, near-perfect shots, or humorous moments. Night falls. Lanterns glow softly, illuminating faces. An elder recites a poem about stars reflected in a pond. The boy listens, his eyelids heavy. He thinks of his family far away, of the ancestors whose names he has learned, and of the long path ahead. He lies on his mat, the ground firm beneath him, and drifts into sleep as insects sing. Physical conditioning complemented skill training. Body weight exercises formed a core element. Push-ups built upper body strength. Students performed them slowly, lowering themselves until their noses nearly touched the floor, then pressing back up with controlled effort. Squats strengthened legs. Trainees held positions with thighs parallel to the ground, feeling muscles tremble. Carrying heavy loads developed endurance. Students transported buckets of sand or water across long distances, maintaining balance and posture. Lifting stones and logs above their heads built shoulder and back strength. Climbing ropes suspended from beams increased grip strength. Crawling under low beams trained agility and awareness of body position. Wrestling formed part of conditioning. Pairs grappled on packed earth, attempting to unbalance each other. These bouts taught leverage, center of gravity, and quick reflexes. Sumo-style pushing contests improved lower body power and stability. Breathing exercises supported physical work. Instructors taught students to breathe from the abdomen, using rhythmic breathing to sustain effort. During strenuous tasks, exhalation accompanied exertion and inhalation accompanied preparation. This technique prevented dizziness and improved efficiency. Diet and rest were considered part of training. Meals included rice, barley, fish, and vegetables, providing energy and nutrients. Fermented foods such as miso and pickles aided digestion. Students were encouraged to avoid overeating. Rest periods allowed muscles to recover. Massage techniques were sometimes used to relieve soreness, with peers kneading shoulders and limbs. Regularly engaging in these conditioning exercises made certain that when wielding swords or pulling bows, the body could support technique. Strength and endurance built through these routines complemented the finesse required in martial arts. Certain festivals were particularly meaningful for young men. The 5th day of the 5th month marked a celebration focusing on boys. Families displayed banners decorated with carp, symbolizing strength and perseverance. Inside houses, miniature armor sets and helmets were arranged on platforms. Mothers prepared rice cakes wrapped in oak leaves, and children participated in games testing strength and agility. During this festival, elders recounted stories of heroic youths. These narratives inspired boys to emulate courage and virtue. Families visited shrines to pray for the health and success of their sons. The presence of carp banners fluttering in the wind reminded everyone of the fish's determined swim upstream, a metaphor for overcoming obstacles. New Year's celebrations, too, involved specific customs. Families cleaned houses thoroughly to welcome the coming year's spirits. They hung straw decorations above entrances to ward off misfortune. A special soup with rice cakes, vegetables, and broth was eaten to bring health. Children received small bags containing coins from elders. Other festivals, such as the Doll Festival in early spring, focused on girls and involved displaying elegant dolls dressed in traditional attire. Though the focus differed, all festivals reinforced the unity of families and the continuity of traditions. Participating in these events provided a joyful counterbalance to the rigors of training. Hospitality and the exchange of gifts were woven into social life. When guests arrived, hosts offered tea, sweets, and seasonal delicacies. The arrangement of dishes on trays reflected attention to balance and aesthetics. Hosts took care to provide comfortable seating and to inquire about the guest's journey. Such gestures conveyed respect and forged goodwill. Gifts served multiple purposes, cementing alliances, expressing gratitude, and celebrating milestones. The selection of an appropriate gift required thought. A scroll with a calligraphy piece might be given to a scholar. A set of lacquered bowls could be presented to newlyweds. Regional specialties such as dried fish or woven textiles served as tokens of the giver's local identity. When visiting another household, warriors often brought a gift, even in cases where the visit was brief. They wrapped items in cloth known as furoshiki, which could be reused. Upon presenting the gift, they apologized for its modesty and expressed hope that it would bring joy. The receiver responded with gratitude, promising to treasure the item. Returning the gesture was common. If someone received a gift, they might later send a gift in return of equal or lesser value, maintaining balance. This exchange created a cycle of reciprocity that strengthened social bonds. Hospitality extended to lodging. Travelers were offered space to sleep, a meal, and sometimes a bath. Hosts provided clean bedding and made certain that guests lacked nothing. These actions reflected the broader ethos of care and mutual support that underpinned social harmony. Travel skills were part of a comprehensive education. Roads connecting the provinces, known as Kaido, ranged from broad highways to narrow mountain trails. Young warriors learned to read road markers and guideposts. They memorized distances between post towns where travelers could rest and replenish supplies. Travelers often stayed at inns called honjin or hatago. These establishments provided lodging, food, and stables. Warriors learned to evaluate inns for security and cleanliness. They understood the protocol for interacting with innkeepers and other guests, maintaining vigilance as showing politeness. Preparation for journeys involved packing supplies efficiently. Light packing was necessary for speed. Warriors carried dried rice, small amounts of salt, flint for fire, and extra bowstrings. They wrapped belongings in oilcloth to protect them from rain. A hat woven from bamboo shielded them from sun and rain. Maintaining horses during travel required knowledge of feeding, grooming, and pacing. Riders learned to dismount regularly, to rest their mounts, to clean hooves, and to adjust saddles. They understood how to identify signs of fatigue and how to select routes with access to water. Travel exposed warriors to varied sceneries. Crossing arched bridges over wide rivers, ascending steep mountain passes, and walking through bamboo groves expanded their geographical awareness. They learned to adapt to different climates and to engage with people from distant regions. Such experiences broadened their perspective beyond their home domains, reinforcing flexibility and curiosity. Emotional balance was viewed as necessary. Students were encouraged to acknowledge feelings without being ruled by them. Stoicism, bearing hardship without complaint, was admired, but not at the expense of compassion. Teachers explained that suppressing emotions completely could lead to sudden outbursts. Instead, they taught techniques to process feelings. Meditation aided in observing emotions. Writing poetry provided an outlet. Sharing concerns with trusted mentors allowed for guidance. Tears were not inherently shameful. Stories told of warriors who wept at the loss of a comrade or at the beauty of a poem. These expressions were considered human. What mattered was the context and the ability to return to composure when duty called. Laughter found its place as well. During evenings, humorous tales and jokes eased tension. Laughter knit the group together and reminded them of their shared humanity. Even during austere training, light-hearted moments allowed for release. Teachers stressed that a balanced person could experience joy, sorrow, and frustration, yet still act with integrity. Cultivating this balance required continuous reflection. Students kept journals, noting successes and failures, joys and regrets. Over time, they learned to view their emotional life as part of their training. Food culture reflected the climate and available resources. Rice formed the staple of the diet, grown in paddies that required careful irrigation. Warriors learned about the labor involved in planting seedlings in spring and harvesting in autumn. They appreciated that each grain of rice represented hours of work by farmers. Meals were balanced with vegetables, fish, and fermented products. Miso, a paste made from soybeans and salt, flavored soups and stews. Soy sauce provided savory depth. Pickled vegetables preserved harvest abundance and added variety during winter. Tofu offered a source of protein. Fish caught in rivers and coastal waters was grilled, boiled, or dried for storage. Preparation of meals followed rituals. Rice was washed until the water ran clear and cooked in earthen pots over charcoal. Vegetables were sliced with sharp knives, each cut precise to make certain even cooking. Presentation mattered. Food was arranged to please the eye, reflecting seasonal colors. Greens in spring, cool white noodles in summer, orange persimmons in autumn, and simmered root vegetables in winter. Eating itself was a practice in mindfulness. Before lifting chopsticks, diners expressed gratitude. They held bowls close to their mouths, minimizing spills. Chewing was quiet. Between bites, they placed chopsticks neatly on rests. They finished everything in their bowls, understanding the effort behind each dish. During training, meals were timed to provide sustenance without sluggishness. Heavy foods that might induce lethargy were avoided. Teachers instructed students about the importance of hydration and avoiding excess salt before long training sessions. Special foods were reserved for festivals or to celebrate milestones, reinforcing the link between diet and social life. Sharing meals built camaraderie. Eating together after a long day encouraged bonds. Stories were exchanged over steaming bowls, creating memories anchored in taste and smell. The act of serving one another, pouring tea, offering pickles, or passing rice bowls reinforced a culture of mutual care. Storytelling served as a means of preserving history and teaching values. Elders recounted tales of legendary warriors, wise rulers, and cunning strategists. Around hearths or under the shade of a tree, young listeners sat in rapt attention. The cadence of the storyteller's voice, the pauses at moments of suspense, and the descriptive language drew them into worlds beyond their own. Epic stories such as the Heike Monogatari detailed the rise and fall of clans. Listening to these tales, listeners learned about the fragility of fortune and the consequences of arrogance. The story of the loyal retainers who avenged their lord's death in spite of personal risk illustrated loyalty. Folk tales about clever peasants outwitting powerful figures reminded listeners that wisdom and humility could triumph over brute force. Parables were shorter and focused on a moral. A story about a bamboo shoot, growing through a stone-stressed persistence. A tale of a monk feeding a hungry tiger with rice instead of chasing it away taught compassion. These stories were told repeatedly, weaving into the fabric of daily life. Storytelling was interactive. Children asked questions about characters' motives or outcomes. Elders encouraged them to think about different choices and their consequences. Through this dialogue, listeners engaged actively with moral lessons. The art of storytelling itself required skill. The teller modulated his voice, used gestures, and sometimes employed props like fans or masks. Younger warriors occasionally practiced storytelling, learning to capture attention and convey meaning succinctly. This skill proved useful later in leadership roles, where the ability to inspire and instruct through narrative helped maintain group morale. Impermanence permeated philosophy and art. The Japanese term that captures sensitivity to impermanence, often translated as awareness of transience, informed how warriors viewed life. Teachers used examples from nature, blossoms that bloom briefly, snowflakes that melt upon touch, and morning mist that dissipates by noon. These images reminded students that beauty and existence are fleeting. Accepting impermanence encouraged humility. Warriors understood that victory could give way to defeat, that prosperity could shift to hardship. This awareness encouraged them to act honorably as their fortunes allowed. It too softened the sharpness of loss, reminding them that sorrow was part of a natural cycle. Art forms embodied this philosophy. The tea ceremony stressed simple, rustic utensils that aged gracefully. Poets wrote of falling leaves and the fading cries of insects. Painters left empty spaces on scrolls to suggest mist or water, inviting the viewer to fill in the rest. In gardens, moss-covered stones and withered branches were embraced rather than removed. Teaching impermanence did not cultivate pessimism. Rather, it instilled appreciation. Knowing that a meeting with a friend might be the last inspired one to cherish the interaction. Recognizing that youth would fade encouraged students to learn diligently as they had energy. The philosophy in this way reinforced the importance of the present moment. Warriors seldom lived in isolation. Towns and markets provided places of exchange, both material and cultural. On market days, streets thrummed with activity. Merchants called out to display cloth, pottery, tools, and food. Farmers brought produce, fishermen displayed fresh catches, and artisans offered wooden toys or woven baskets. The air filled with aromas of grilled fish, sweet pastries, and incense from nearby shrines. Warriors visited markets to purchase goods, to oversee order, or to collect taxes. Their presence maintained peace, but interactions required tact. Warriors wore simple clothing to blend in, recognizing that ostentatious display could intimidate. They greeted shopkeepers politely, inquiring about the origin of goods. They learned to bargain respectfully, making certain fair prices without exploiting sellers. Interactions with commoners provided insight into daily challenges outside the martial sphere. Warriors listened to concerns about crop yields, weather, and trade barriers. These conversations informed governance. When hearing that a bridge had been damaged by a storm, they could report it to higher authorities for repair. When noticing shortages of salt or fabric, they might adjust trade routes. In towns, young warriors observed craftspeople at work: potters shaping clay, metalworkers hammering blades, carpenters sawing planks. They saw the care invested in each item and appreciated the skill involved. Observing the labor of others reinforced respect. Festivals in town squares united all classes. Warriors and commoners danced, sang, and shared food. Temporary hierarchies relaxed. People mixed more freely. Such gatherings strengthened community bonds and allowed warriors to see themselves as part of a larger whole. They returned to their duties with renewed understanding of who they served. Written communication played a critical role in record-keeping and personal expression. Warriors maintained diaries to document daily activities, reflections, and observations. Entries might include descriptions of training routines, insights from meetings, dreams, and personal aspirations. Writing regularly honed language skills and provided a space for introspection. Letters connected friends and family across distances. A letter began with formal greetings, followed by seasonal references. Mentioning the blooming of plum blossoms or the first snow signaled awareness of the recipient's environment. Writers often included a short poem that encapsulated mood or sentiment. They reported news, requested assistance, offered congratulations, or extended condolences. Closing lines expressed wishes for health and prosperity. Composing letters required careful choice of paper and brush. High-quality paper signaled respect. Handwriting conveyed personality. Flowing lines suggested calmness, whereas abrupt strokes might indicate haste or agitation. Sending a letter involved selecting an appropriate messenger and sometimes adding a small gift, such as a folded paper crane or pressed flower. Diaries served not only personal purposes, but two historical ones. Generations later, descendants could read ancestors' diaries to understand their lives. These records preserved details about weather patterns, economic conditions, and social customs. They offered insights into how training evolved and how individuals responded to events. Young warriors were encouraged to read famous diaries written by poets or generals. These works provided models for writing and inspiration. By following such examples, they learned to observe their surroundings closely and to articulate thoughts clearly. Recreation in warrior communities often served dual purposes, providing relaxation and reinforcing skills. One popular game, Kamari, involved keeping a deerskin ball aloft using only the feet. Played in a circle, participants passed the ball with gentle kicks, aiming to prevent it from touching the ground. Though appearing simple, the game required concentration, coordination, and cooperation. Warriors played Kamari in gardens, sometimes wearing formal robes. The slow, rhythmic movement and the focus on graceful posture complemented martial training by improving balance and awareness of others' positions. Horse archery competitions, known as yabusame, combined sport with spiritual practice. Riders galloped along a straight track, aiming to hit small wooden targets with arrows as maintaining speed. The course usually featured 3 targets spaced evenly. Before beginning, the rider bowed at a shrine, seeking focus. As the horse charged forward, the rider stood up in the stirrups, drawing the bow and releasing 3 arrows in quick succession. Spectators held their breath as arrows thudded into targets. Success required perfect timing, strong legs, and a calm mind. These events were often held at shrines to entertain the gods and to pray for peace. Sumo bouts, though associated with sport, had religious origins and were sometimes included in training camps. 2 contestants faced each other in a circular ring, attempting to push their opponent out or cause him to touch the ground with any body part other than the soles of his feet. The matches stressed explosive power, footwork, and strategy. Young warriors participated to build strength and to learn how to read an opponent's intent. Rituals before matches, such as stamping feet and throwing salt, served to purify the ring and set a respectful tone. Falconry offered another recreational pursuit with practical benefits. Training a hawk required patience, gentle handling, and knowledge of avian behavior. Warriors trained birds to hunt small game like rabbits and pheasants. This activity sharpened observation skills and cultivated a bond between handler and animal. It too provided meat for the table and a connection to nature. Falconry outings were social occasions. Warriors rode together, releasing birds and watching them dive with precision. After the hunt, they discussed the bird's performance and their own techniques. Games using shells or cards tested memory and knowledge. In shell matching, players paired clam shells painted on the inside with poems. Card games involved matching verses from a 100-poem anthology. These games required memorizing poems and recognizing subtle patterns, thereby reinforcing literary education. Recreational activities revealed the holistic nature of training. Leisure was not separate from discipline, it was a continuation of it through other forms. Whether kicking a ball, guiding a horse at speed, wrestling in a sand ring, or training a hawk, the warrior cultivated qualities such as balance, focus, patience, and camaraderie. Clothing choices adapted to both social expectations and practical needs. Daily attire for training consisted of loose trousers, tied at the waist, and a jacket secured with a belt. Fabric varied with the season, lighter hemp or cotton in summer, thicker wool or layered silk in winter. Colors were often subdued, reflecting humility and avoiding distraction. For formal occasions, warriors wore a kimono made of silk with patterns that reflected clan symbols or seasonal motifs. During cold months, they added haori, a hip-length jacket, or hakama, a pleated skirt-like garment worn over trousers. Layering allowed for movement as providing insulation. Clothing was maintained meticulously. Stains were treated quickly, and seams were reinforced. Under armor, warriors wore padded garments to cushion blows and prevent chafing. A cotton kimono and a pair of trousers formed the base layer, followed by a vest padded with cotton or hemp. This padding absorbed sweat and protected the skin from the metal or lacquered plates. In hot weather, wearing armor became uncomfortable, but the padding prevented direct contact and kept the armor stable. Footwear changed with activities. Straw sandals, known as waraji, were common for everyday wear. They were light and could be made quickly, but they wore out fast and needed replacement. For travel, sturdier sandals with thicker soles were chosen. Warriors sometimes wrapped their lower legs with cloth strips to protect against scratches and to support muscles during long marches. Headgear ranged from simple head wraps to elaborate helmets. During training or work, a cloth tied around the head absorbed sweat and kept hair out of the eyes. On formal occasions, hats made of woven bamboo or lacquered wood signified status. Helmets worn in battle were works of art and protection. They included neck guards and sometimes horns or crests displaying clan emblems. Inside the helmet, a padded cap provided comfort and kept the helmet secure. Young warriors learned to dress themselves efficiently. They practiced tying belts with one hand, adjusting straps without assistance, and folding garments neatly when not in use. Attention to clothing reflected broader discipline. Taking care of attire signified respect for oneself and others, and readiness for sudden duty.